we'll post it. So welcome again to our webinar, The Power of Storytelling and Community-Based Global Learning Programs. My name is Mike Bishop. I'm the Managing Director of the Collaborative. Really happy to have our friend Aubrey Canfield, co-founder and managing producer of Actuality Abroad, with us. Before I introduce Aubrey and their work, I'd like to say a few words about the Collaborative. And as I do, feel free, folks, to drop into the chat where you're zooming in from. I'm outside of Ithaca, New York right now on the traditional lands of the Gayakono Haudenosaunee people. And I am going to drop into the chat while you are doing that a little bit about the Collaborative, especially if you're new to the Collaborative. I encourage you to explore that on your own time or with me in a one-on-one or drop-in. The Collaborative is a membership-driven network of educational institutions and community organizations, and our mission is to advance community-based global learning and research for more just, inclusive, and sustainable communities. We do this through our 4 activities. We seek to create connection, mobilize knowledge, and measure our impact. This is one of our main activities, along with in-person events, our webinar series. And we've had a tremendous response to this particular topic. We are on the verge of announcing our Summer Asia Pacific Hub virtual series, as well as our in-person Fall Institute. So all of that will be noted in our newsletter, which you will receive unless you noted you did not want to receive our newsletter in the registration. So that's one activity, is bringing folks together, connecting around common interest. A second is measuring our impact through our global engagement survey. It's a multi-institutional survey that measures student learning on community-based global learning trips. And then 3 and 4 activities for us are our Fair Trade Learning and Toolkit. So Fair Trade Learning is our ethos. Looking at Actuality Abroad's website, there's a lot of alignment between Fair Trade Learning, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to invite Aubrey here. And then our toolkit is curriculum that's ready for you to use pre-departure while students are on their experiences or the people you're working with, or post-experience. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. Welcome, folks. Thanks again for being here. To the topic at hand. So this particular webinar will explore what storytelling is, how it naturally shows up at different levels in CBGL programs, and the powerful opportunities it creates when approached intentionally. This topic is of special interest to me because my own scholarship is based on storytelling with social movements. So I'm really eager to hear Aubrey, who will share her experience in understanding storytelling as a process of documenting and sharing experiences that fosters reflection, builds connections, and communicates meaningful narratives. After the presentation of about an hour, we'll have dialogue and Q&A, so hopefully you can stick around for that. And the Q&A will focus on actionable strategies for guiding students in this work and storytelling that practices that prioritize respect and inclusivity. I will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to drop questions or comments there. And to say a few words about Actuality Abroad. Actuality Abroad is an educational travel organization that connects travelers with local change makers through collaborative documentary storytelling projects. It helps impact-driven storytellers get the training, experience, and support they need to travel the world and tell stories that matter. Before co-founding, Aubrey spent a previous career in the high-pressure world of big-budget films and advertising. Now, as managing producer, she leads the organization in creating transformative documentary storytelling experiences that connect travelers with changemakers across the globe. She's a graduate of the University of Miami. Please join me in welcoming Aubrey. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am so excited to chat with you all about this subject because I came to education abroad from a place of storytelling. So although I had a lot of personal experience traveling and learning while I was traveling and abroad, my background's in filmmaking, and I did that for kind of the first part of my career. And so what's interesting about like my personal journey in this work, which we would call collaborative documentary storytelling. So we teach collaborative documentary storytelling in either a study abroad program or a community-based global learning program, however you want to kind of qualify it. And we kind of had to figure out how to do this well as we were doing it. So that because certainly 15 years ago when we started, no one was really having conversations about ethical storytelling or like what it meant to show up in communities and the power dynamics that are inherently in place when people mostly from the global north are traveling to the global south, which is mostly where we do our work, and documenting their stories. So we like to think that we had some level of consciousness from the beginning, but it certainly was through doing the work, program after program, and hearing from our story holders that we collaborate with about how we and our crews could do the work better, and starting to have more intentional conversations about not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it and the impact that that had on the students that travel with us. So, okay, I'm gonna share my screen and I'm not gonna screw it up. Uh-oh, I think I already did. Going back. All right, share, and then this button, this one, and then share. All right, did it work? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so the first question is why storytelling? Why are we talking about storytelling in this context? And the first reason is because storytelling is an inherent part of being human. It's how we make sense of the events sort of around us, and it's happening every day, possibly every moment of all of the programs that you and your colleagues are leading. But a lot of it goes unexamined and unstructured, and it doesn't have a lot of intention behind it. So therefore, it can feed into stereotypes, which can then either limit the growth opportunities that your students have in these experiences that they're having abroad, or it could even cause harm in perpetuating harmful stereotypes or in leading to conflict in the communities that you might be working with. So guided storytelling, being intentional about how we tell stories, what are we choosing to tell stories about, can really transform how the students experience and reflect on the programs that they're a part of. And then it also, as they're coming home, it impacts how the communities that they're traveling to are being perceived. And the ripple effect of those storytelling stories in the communities of your students or the academic communities that they're in about what their experiences was like. So hopefully in this chat, in this talk that we're going to have, I would love to offer some frameworks because frameworks are my favorite. To have a talk about ethics, like what does it mean to do ethical storytelling? And I'm constantly learning about this myself, so I can give you the information that we have learned up until this point, and just hopefully some easy ways to integrate intentional storytelling in the programs that you guys are already running. So my first question for you guys, if we can put it in the chat, is what are you aware of? What storytelling is already taking place in your programs? Like what are you even aware of is already happening in the work that you do? Who's telling stories and about what? Simply. Oh, I have a slide for that. Hang on. Oh no. We didn't touch this part. Will it go? Let's see. All right, I did it. So what kind of storytelling already shows up in your programs? I'm actually very curious to hear. Oh, look, maybe I can make the chat work. There we go. Yeah, of course. Sarah Rogers says, often people with privilege telling stories about people with less privilege. Yes, it's an inherent ethical dilemma in a lot of this work. Leanne has group that's deeply rooted in storytelling. Oh, that's so cool, Leanne. I would love to chat more about the work that you, sorry, I got excited and I cut it off. I guess you guys can read it too, but doing personal narratives and also collaborating with communities and with a variety of like very deep strategy. Students sharing about their personal experiences on social media. Yeah, Kelsey. That's a massive one, and one that I think has one of the greatest potential to have the greatest positive impact if we can be strategic about it, and support the students in doing that well. Yes, learners sharing stories about transformational experiences. Oh yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. You could also just speak up, Mike, unless Mike says we could also have folks speak. Okay, we'll do that for the next time then. Okay. So Scott and or Megan says that we have a lot of raw and vulnerable conversations around intercultural citizenship concepts. That's a new term for me, actually. I'm very familiar with global citizenship, but intercultural citizenship is that's I think an improvement. I think I'm going to have to look more into that. Oh, that's so lovely, Francine, to facilitate a digital storytelling workshop for students returning. That would be, now I want to hear about all of the work that you guys are doing. You know what, we'll save time for it afterwards. I would love to hear about how you guys are already doing this work. That's awesome. Felicia has students sharing weekly reflections guided by prompts. Others more personal reflection and question. Great, that's awesome. Oh, that's interesting, Stephen. The student teams are being increasingly being asked by community partners to produce media and stories to help them accomplish their outreach goals. We should talk more about achievable ways of doing that, because that's essentially what we do in our work. And it doesn't have to be, it can be complicated, but it also doesn't have to be so. Okay, awesome. Thanks, you guys. All right, so hold on, I got to close the chat now. There we go. So let's talk about a little bit about what is storytelling. So what do we actually mean by storytelling in that context? So from a filmmaker standpoint, or from a script writing standpoint, the way that I would say it is that stories telling is a telling of an event in a way that engages the audience. So there's two elements about that. There's the event that's taking place, the reality of what's happening, and then how it is crafted, how it is intentionally structured in order to engage with whoever you're telling that story to, the audience. And so we operate from the standpoint there is no such thing as objective storytelling, that that as soon as it becomes a story, you're putting your own lens on it, you're deciding essentially how to spin it in a way. And that's not to say that it is that is bad or that is manipulative, but that is just the way that we tell stories. So if we can kind of get in front of it, that stories are a construct, then we can decide in what way do we want to construct this, and to what end. So storytelling includes so many of the things that you guys mentioned in the chat. So it includes journals and essays. It can include images, both just single photographs or posts. It can be the voice memos, or it can be interviews. It can be the account, the storytelling over coffee to your parents or your friends after your trip. And it's important to know that it happens before, during, and after the trip. And it can both be internal, internal, like a self-reflective, like the story that I tell myself. Interpersonal, in terms of a dialogue, me sharing my my experience, or even someone else's experience with somebody else. Or it can be very public, representing the experience in some larger way. So the thing is, what I have to remember, what's important about storytelling is it's not just about how we tell it. Like the storytelling process itself shapes the way that we see our experience. So, and the more often we tell stories about specific experiences, the more solidified they are in our memory about that is what has happened. So as a process, something that we talk a lot about in our work is it's not so much about the product or the outcome, or like the finished story. This is the story that I'm telling people, but the process in which we go deciding what the story is can be the most impactful, transformative part of the storytelling thing. So let's try to, maybe some people want to come off mute and share a little bit out loud, since there's not too many of us here. All right, now I got to press this thing. What kind of, oh man, wrong way. Stand by. All right. I'm curious from your own personal experiences, one travel story that changed the way that you understood a place. Does anybody have anything interesting that they want to share?
I have one, I guess. I was in Guatemala with a Highland Support Project building project, and at the time I was a carpenter contractor, and most of the people who were in our group were insurance salesmen and investment people from like Ohio, and our van broke down way up in the mountains, real rocky, craggy place, a big boulder kind of bent a um, what do you call it? The connector between the clutch and stuff. So, anyways, it's oh, I'm not in there. How much? Let's see. Maybe now. There we go. So I was the only guy who was halfway proficient with the tool. Didn't consider myself a mechanic, but I was sort of the mechanic by default. And what happened was I ended up needing to go on the ride, 2.5, 3 hour ride from Guatemala, from where we were in Chichicastenango to Guatemala City. And it was decided that we would leave at like 2:30 or 3 in the morning because it was the general assumption that the banditos had all gone to sleep by then.
Hmm.
And we're driving through, and we got stopped at one point at a police checkpoint where there was no identifying badge or number or anything. Somehow got waved through that, and we made it back. We were in Guatemala City for a while. We made it back with the van. It kind of worked out okay. But just odd elements. There was this other guy who was some crazy Turk, and I don't mean to be, not politically incorrect or anything because I don't know any Turks, but he was supposedly this crazy Turk gangster sort of fellow who decided he was going to trash that very same van. And he did, and he totally maximized the damage to the van. I don't know. It was just a real interesting way of like to see in a very real and visceral way what might happen to you if you didn't like color in the lines between the lines, you know?
Hmm.
And but it was also a real interesting view about, I kind of got an understanding of what Turkish and Guatemalan culture and the intersection. I mean, just some of the intricacies. It was just like, I don't know, it was something, It wasn't a happy ending story, not necessarily. It just kind of was.
Is there like what did you believe before this experience and what was different after this experience
Mhm.
in your
That
understanding of either
that was
Guatemala or the Turks?
yeah. Well, that was my first foray south of the border of the U.S.
Hmm.
So in that way, it was kind of like, woohoo, wow, and it definitely wasn't in a like, canned kind of resort Mexican vacation kind of way. And I've always tried to shy away from that kind of thing myself. But um, so I guess I was open to it. I'd spent a lot of time on the reservation and in South Dakota and North Dakota before that. So you know, some culture shock, some not so culture shock. The thing that really, I guess, blew me away more than anything was just the amount of heavy firepower everybody seemed to have on the street, on the sidewalk, and guards and machine guns and this and that. And I don't know. Then it was sort of shocking and like crazy, like the whole thing about, banditos in the middle of the night and the unmarked policemen with the balaclavas that they're wearing where you're just seeing, who are these people
Hmm.
telling you got a $50 fine because your light's out or whatever, you know? They
Yeah.
they work for not much, but whatever they can, or at least that was how it was then. I don't know how it is now, I mean, there's then,
Hmm.
there's now,
Thank
but
you.
mhm. Yeah,
Does
you
anyone else
bet.
have a story that they want to share?
Sure. I would like to share a story that happened today. And
Mhm.
it's very fresh, We have this nice cooperation with Uganda, with the school, Santa Teresa. I work mostly on virtual means, you know. Ethical travel is something, you know, I invite the guys to travel, but I really tell them that it costs a lot, you know. I mean, there are lots of hidden costs in traveling. So I kind of have a lot of virtual meetings. And we have this school in Santa Teresa. It's a public school. I mean, it's really Uganda, you know, it's third world and a public school. And our students have organized a bunch of beamers, you know, for the school. And we're now getting them down there. And we have this lady, and we really want to empower her. Her name is Viola. And Viola is working with us since, I don't know, 2 years now. And school teachers change, you know, headmasters change, but Viola stays there. And she's really a very, very brilliant, talented young woman. And she gave birth, and I didn't know. You know, she gave birth to a child, and so we had this meeting, and then she showed up with her child, and we had this, you know, student team. I mean, we have bachelors on 5th semester, but this was wow, you know, this was just an amazing moment, you know, in encountering. And it really opened up a lot, and it was really, really nice and moving and loving. And you see, I love my partners. That's how it is. That's how I work. And I think that love is really a very, very strong, you know, motivation to stay on and to be, you know, to establish very trustful and loving relationships with your partners. Yeah. So this was my story today to share.
Thank you so much.
Mhm, mhm.
Francine, did you have a story we wanted to share?
I did. When I was 16, I traveled with 3 friends to northern Spain without parental supervision. That was before the Channel Tunnel, so we took the ferry and a train. And the only reason my parents let me go is because my boyfriend, shock, my boyfriend's mom was from northern Spain, and so he had grandparents and aunts and uncles out there. And towards the end of our month-long stay, I had an appendicitis in a tent and was taken by ambulance 80 miles from Llanes to Oviedo. This was in 83. So it wasn't too long since Spain was coming out of its dictatorship and its isolation from the rest of Europe. And really nobody spoke any English. And so I was actually left in the hospital. My boyfriend had to leave and go home because he had a ticket to get back on the train and get back on the ferry to go back to England. I had very cheap travel insurance that we bought at the last minute. But I was taken care of. I was really well taken care of in this hospital. There was one male nurse who would come down every day from a floor above to talk to me for a little while in English, and he brought me a Graham Greene book to read. But other than that, everyone spoke Spanish. And I had been, I guess you would say, I grew up in a little tiny village in England, didn't travel to the continent. That was something that, you know, middle and lower middle class and working class folks didn't do before cheap budget travel. And I guess I was language curious because I dabbled in a little bit of French and a little bit of German in school, but it was vocabulary lists and grammar. And it was in this hospital at one point I needed to go to the toilet and I couldn't explain. So I called the nurse over. I couldn't get out of bed. I was on a drip and I was trying to explain that I needed to go to the loo, and she didn't understand. And I finally went, I need to pss. And she said, oh, necesitas hacer pis. And it was this wonderful moment of, yes, relief, embarrassment, but it also profoundly impacted me and made me realize that languages are living things, and not everybody speaks English. Not that I was aware that that's what I thought, but it made me aware of what I probably had internalized. And I went back and I changed the whole trajectory of my life. And
Wow. Thank you,
one step
Francine.
at a time.
Ashley, do you want to share one more story before we move on?
It's a very quick story.
Great.
I just was gonna say when I was, it was 2009 when I was 18. I was in Serbia for about 9 months, and I was traveling with I was living with a homestay family, and I was traveling with them, and like in the mountains or something. And I remember this like person who worked there. This is all a little bit hazy, but who worked there came up on kind of like um, a snowmobile sort of thing. And I think my host mom was very much like, oh, get on it, trying to like encourage this and like make it a fun experience for me. And one of the things she said in doing that was that she said, don't worry, she didn't bomb us. And it was such an interesting moment for me as an 18-year-old to sort of conceptualize that that was even at the front of someone's mind. And to think about, I mean, that paired with then having conversations with my host sisters about how they actually watched bombs drop from their apartment building. And I think it changed my understanding of the place, in that I was coming in as an outsider. And I mean, as an 18-year-old thinking like, I'm coming to this new place and it's got its history, but I think it changed my understanding to realize that the history that I thought that this place had was still alive. Like it was something that was still living in everyone around me. And so I couldn't come in and just assume like, oh, that's all the past and there's nothing that I bring along with me in my identity. But to understand that all of that history is really complicated, and that, you know, we bear the weight of things that we might not even realize, that we're sort of attached to. But to just to realize that so much was still living in like my host sisters that were like in their 20s, to even understand that was just shocking that I couldn't like treat history as just history, right? Yeah, I was 18, but it changed the way I sort of interacted with the place and with the world. So
Thank you. So now I want to talk about, it's interesting because everybody shared kind of a personal story, but there's also added layers to all that storytelling, right? Like the stories that you had, the experiences that you had, how that reflected the communities that you were in. And then there's this other level of how that reflects in any kind of institutions that you might be associated with. And so those are like the three kinds of storytelling, and there's probably more, but they can fall under these sort of headings of the opportunities that we all have in the work that we do and with the people that we work with, but the kinds of the kind of stories that we can be intentional about. So the first, of course, is personal, how a student tells the story of their own experience, what happened to them, what they learned, what they did, what they saw, what they ate, and hopefully how they're different on the other side because of their experience. But there's also the level of the community. And by this means the other people's stories. So it's the quick snapshot in the post on Instagram saying, oh, I met this person and, and aren't they the coolest? They have an urban farm in, in the city of Madrid or wherever. But how others are represented in the stories that particularly students tell is a great opportunity for learning, for reflection, but also an area of greater responsibility. And then there's the I can't say it, let's covered it. Programmatic, I wrote that word and I can't even say it, programmatic storytelling, which is for all the institutions, all the schools or organizations that we're a part of. How do those organizations tell stories about the experiences they offer, the experiences their students have? We're going to talk the least amount about that for the rest of our time together, but it is something that I think that everybody should reflect on. Maybe we don't have control over how those stories are crafted and shared, but it is a place for some significant intentionality if we can. Okay, does anyone has anyone seen, oh my goodness, I'm getting distracted by the chat. All right, I'm going to focus here. Let me know, Mike, if there's anything that if you want to interrupt. Oh no, go back. There we go. If you want to interrupt with any questions that would be good to interject in what I'm saying, feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, I have a question
Oh, sure.
regarding the programmatic issue, you know. For me, it's a really big danger and risk to offer my institution to make use of my work because they tend to instrumentalize my stuff. How do I deal with that?
As a photographer or as a writer or as a filmmaker?
As a lecturer.
As a lecturer. I guess, so what kinds of things might you share with them that they might be making more widely available to the public?
It's like, you know, I'm working for a very capitalistic institution and I'm not into market-driven economies. I see a lot of market failures, you know, through my projects. I see a lot of injustice and inequality that they don't address. So I kind of, you know, hesitate to give them my stuff because I feel they instrumentalize this for, you know, promoting how great they are, how big the change leaders are in the world, you know, all this crap. I'm just not, I don't want to fake, you know.
Yeah, I
And
hear that. It's like, it's
hesitate
very,
to use them, you know. I mean, they use it for blue washing and green washing, and I'm not into it that, you know.
I'm just curious, what exactly are they using? Like, what are you handing over to them? Like an anecdote about your experience or?
They have access to all my programs, you know. They could make use of it, but they don't, luckily. So I hesitate I mean, that storytelling stuff you're telling, you know. I mean, you know, programmatic issue. Can you turn back to the slide?
Sure. Go back. Let's see if I can make it work. There we go. Yeah.
So how the institution represents the experience. That's my question, you know. What do you do if the institution does not represent your experience from a critical point of view? What should we do as lecturers if the institution does not represent your work they use it for ideological purpose, okay? This is where ideology comes in, you know, ideologic purpose means, you know, to use it for not this right purpose, you know, not for the people, but for the institution. I mean, that's ideology, you know, that's kind of market-driven, you know.
I think Aubrey's
you know what I
prepared to
mean?
answer this question, Marcus, if you want to give her a chance to answer it. Here we go. Go ahead.
So where I have experience that might provide some insight or some help to what you're dealing with is that, so I work with a lot of small social impact organizations in different communities around the world. And then we also work with the distributors for distributing the stories that we produce. And so we didn't do this in the beginning, but this is something that we work into all of our programming, is that we practice not just informed consent for all of the people, all of the story holders, everybody whose experience is reflected in the story. It's not just about consent, it's almost a form of radical consent where everybody who we consider a story holder, so everybody who is contributing a story of their own experience in some way or has crafted a story in some way, has veto power over whether or not that story is shared. So I don't know if this exists in the institution that you're working on, but for instance, if they're using other people's stories, so the stories of your students or the stories of community members of the communities that you work in, and you are the intermediary between those story holders and the institution, then it would be reasonable to set up essentially a kind of veto power structure, where the sense is like all stories that they distribute. So the standard kind of practice is that people want folks to sign a waiver and then they'll use their images or their stories however they'd like. That's very basic and it's incredibly inequitable. And so if there's the opportunity to change that to where the people whose stories are being documented and shared for marketing purposes have an opportunity to review and agree over how their story is leveraged. Even just bringing that up at an institutional level, even just bringing it up and being like, hey, so moving forward, I think that if we show people in our marketing images that before that those are distributed, we should ask them if we can do that with theirs. And they might say no, but the fact that you're even having that conversation, and we're even like this level of conversation around consent over use of image and story, particularly in the power dynamics, is just like coming to the surface. And the under 25-year-old generation are acutely aware over how their images are being used to sell things. And they don't generally want to be a part of it unless they had an incredible experience and they would like more people to be a part of that experience. So opening up that conversation and pointing at the fact that just broad use of other people's stories, whether those are visual or written, is not an ethical practice. So it's in all of these sectors, you're pushing up against decades, if not longer, of bureaucracy and an entrenched way of doing things, where the people who hold the camera have control, or the people who hold the image license have control, and it's starting to change. And so you could be a part of that conversation to shift it. Is that helpful?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank
Sure.
you. Thank you.
Okay, so now, I mean, it seems like many of you already get this, right? But why does intentionality matter in terms of storytelling? And if you haven't seen this TED Talk from probably 15 or maybe even 20 years ago by Chimamanda Adichie, The Danger of a Single Story, that should be the next thing that you go and watch on YouTube. And I'm going to sum up her story poorly, but to give a slight teaser of it, she grew up in Nigeria. She had a relatively privileged background. She was making some very large assumptions about the people that they had for help in the house, particularly a boy who came from a rural village, maybe an hour or two away. And she had this idea of like what his life must be like. If he's living in the city and working in our home, this must be his poor, terrible life that he must have if he's having to do this kind of work. And she had an opportunity to go and visit him in his village and saw what like a connected, rich, interesting, dynamic life that he had in his village. And it sort of blew up all of her stereotypes of what it meant to be I think the term that she used is houseboy in a home in Nigeria. And she is an author, a Nigerian author who writes incredible fiction stories. But the whole kind of the thesis behind this video that she so beautifully articulates is that it's not that stereotypes are wrong, it's that they are incomplete. And when we only see people or communities for the stereotype, for or reinforce the existing dominant narrative of a people or a place, it's just a massive missed opportunity first, to have greater knowing and to have greater understanding and to have greater connection. And so that's why the act of storytelling, the opportunity of all of these stories that are being crafted in the education abroad process, every single one is an opportunity to go a little bit deeper, to get more into your understanding, to challenge the ideas that our existing culture has given us about a people or a place. And so we can grow and we can learn, which of course is the largest reason that we're all engaged in this kind of work. Let's see.
Aubrey, if I could complement that with just
Go.
something that has really spoken to me about trying to displace negative stories that carry stereotypes, as opposed to trying to encircle those stories with additional stories, right? There's two different ways to think about stories that dehumanize. And so that is something that's really come out of some of the research I've done, is, as one person said, that they want to fly both the Black Lives Matter flag and a US flag on their property because they want to really provoke people into thinking, how can that be that someone's flying both of those flags as opposed to one or the other? So complicating the story, I think is one tactic or strategy to get at what you're saying too.
Absolutely. Okay, so I just want to do, let's see. We'll probably do this kind of like as an internal exercise. So, this is the most common, device that students are going to use to document their experiences of their regular life and of when they're traveling. There's a tremendous amount of power in this very tiny computer. And it's out, right? It's out. It's in their hands. It's being used. And so it should be addressed in some way about how are we engaging with this tool, because that's what it is, particularly when we are in other people's communities, in other people's homes. And so I just wanted to do a quick kind of like thought experiment about this. So this is just a photo if someone's exploring in a rural part of the world. I'm curious. Actually, let's put it in the chat. Let's see if I can see this. What might students say about this photo? So if somebody puts this on Instagram, right? Or texts it to their friends in the group chat, what might a student say about this particular photo? Gorgeous. Oh yeah, that's great. Mike said to have a great day with. Ah, cute. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So authentic, so idyllic. So now I'm curious, what assumptions, if someone just saw this photograph, like what assumptions right now are we making about like this person's life or like this person's values? um, Maybe something about what a simple life they must lead, right? Like um, how going back to nature or how rural that environment, yeah, has a closer relationship with nature. Or there's certainly there must be a rural farmer. But what don't we know about this person's experience, right? Like we don't know where they live. We don't know we don't know what economic status they have. What is their relationship with technology? Maybe we go home and they have like this massive like PC gaming setup that we don't even know about. Oh, right. Or that Britain says this is a true version of his culture, not spoiled by outside influences, which is, a construct in and of itself. And now I'm curious if this man was telling the story, what might he say about that moment? And are students reflecting upon that? Like, are they reflecting about how they are the outside influence, how they are coming in, and how this guy says, hey, these crazy kids in these funny outfits like came stomping through my trail today. And we shared a laugh, or right. Hurry up and take the picture already. Ashley says, I don't understand what's so interesting about this that they want to take a photo. Yeah, exactly, Francine. Please don't take a photo of me, perhaps. Now I want to go to this next picture. It's a little bit more controversial. So the same kind of questions like to think about, like what story might a student assume that this photo tells? And certainly how would the children talk about this moment? How would they describe this experience? And then, of course, the question is, should students be taking pictures of other people's children at all? And I actually would love for people to come off mute to share their thoughts about that, or how maybe they have tackled it in their existing programs.
Aubrey, I can share a little bit about
Please,
some.
Leanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I think about many international schools will have, like a week without walls. They may call it a variety of different things, but 1 week a year where students go out and they're either in country or out of country doing a variety of trips, and some of them might be service based, some of them might be, adventure based. But I think that often there are no rules around the types of photos that students take when they are on those experiences. And that's definitely something that I think is an area of growth for most schools. Like, you know, they might be really intentional about the type of reflection that the students are doing about what they're learning and doing and all of that. But the digital citizenship piece of it, in terms of how they are working with their tool, their phone, when they're on those trips, I think there's very little guidance into kids. So I think that a lot of the time the kids can be free to take whatever photos they want. That's been my experience anyway, and I think there's a lot of room to grow all of our students' understandings of the power of the tool and what it means to be ethical with that tool when they're out there.
Yeah, and such opportunity too. Like, it's not just about like saying like teaching them the don'ts, right? Like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But like, how can you use this tool as a mechanism for connection, right? Like there's so much opportunity for positive impact that you could have as well. I mean, I operate from the standpoint, and then we advise all of our travelers that we don't take pictures of other people's children ever. Unless you have a very actual close relationship. So sometimes we will make documentaries about children but in that case, we have had multiple conversations with the parents and have done our due diligence to understand that the children do want to be a part of this project. But the drive-by shooting, I don't actually use that word when I talk about photography anymore, but that idea is not cool. And it's okay to put boundaries around that. Like it's like, that's an interesting conversation to have. Like, what and why not? And then if it comes up, then it's another opportunity to, if somebody does something wrong, that's another opportunity to have a conversation about it in context where it actually like lands and is impactful. Oh, that's great, Felicia. So Felicia says that in their program, students are not allowed to capture the face of a child in their photos, and if so, they need a signed waiver from the parents. And that's a pretty basic approach. Okay. All right. So then let's talk a little bit about. So these are kind of the rules when it comes to ethical storytelling. Oops. Let's see. Here we go. So these are our ethical storytelling kind of frameworks. I mean, we could go, we do even more than this because of just the scope of the projects that we do. But these are questions that could be integrated into programming, whether it is pre-departure resources or meetings that you have in country about the stories of others specifically. Because that's typically where the ethical component comes in. It's when you're telling stories about the community, about people other than yourself. But that goes also for other participants, for leaders in the program, but certainly like the community members. So first, who does the story center? So who is at the center of the story? One of the kind of examples that I like to use when it comes to the voluntourism industrial complex, as was mentioned, is if people are doing some kind of service project and taking a picture of people that might benefit from that project and staging themselves as a hero, like look at the work that look at this amazing work that I've done in country, is a very common, right? A much more ethical, and to me a much more interesting approach to that is to find the people in charge and to center their stories. Like, look at this amazing community leader who has started this clean water project for their own village, and lifting them up in the story and saying how much you admire the work that they are doing. Was the story holder informed and willing to be included? So this is when it comes down to like free and informed consent. And we practice ongoing consent, where is if we get consent if we're going to document, and then if we're going to do anything with that image or with that person's story, that we get back in touch because we have a relationship, and get their consent about the way that their story is going to be told. Connie, I see your hand raised. Is that how I say your name?
Yeah, perfect. Really, really provoking discussion. Hello to everybody. Obviously, I've been on the chat. I think I'm very quite provoked at this point, because what I have found over the years, and including now, is that we become when people are telling stories, and specifically on the part of documentation, we are in production mode. There is the part that says there's an output that needs to be part of this. And then we miss the process. We miss the richness of the process because there is pressure that at the end of that, there should be something. And I think we need to think more critically about not only just the purpose, but the richness and the wisdom of time, and how it is that these stories actually, or people's stories affect us internally, but not necessarily for there to be any sort of documentation or pressure to produce something. The part of it for me is just to be fully immersed, than actually thinking that the end point is a product. So maybe let me leave it there. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for that input. I could not agree more. There is this pressure. It's so interesting because that's so related to like actual like documentary production too. Like there's a momentum when you get into doing a creative project that it's hard to slow down. Even if you want to be as intentional about it, but it's also in the casual just Instagramming, right? Like, oh, I'm not present because I have to document this experience. One of the ways that we address this, and it's also just like best practices for storytelling in general, is that we talk about this idea of needing to research before we document. So when we first go out into communities, we don't have any cameras, and we're there to build relationships. So it's research and relationship building. And if we are lucky enough to be able to establish a relationship, to be able to collaborate with somebody on their story, it's because we've taken the time to be present and to be immersed and to connect with them just as human people. And so I don't know if that kind of process could be translated into a not storytelling focused program. But I mean, there's actually something really interesting there about the idea that like you come into a community and you shouldn't have a camera up. Like you need to have a relationship established before you have earned the right to document what is going on here. So you have these questions here. They're pretty self-explanatory. Does it reflect the full context, not just the visible moment? I actually think that that's kind of an impossible thing. It's like once you point a lens in a particular direction, like you have already cut out all of this, everything else that's going around here. So it's not going to reflect the full context. But then what impact does that have? And so bringing that up as again, another conversation, another thought experiment about like, what is it when I point the camera this direction, or when I tell the story from this perspective, or when I only talk about this person and not this person, like, what does that do to the story? How does narrowing the focus impact the story? And is that ethical? I will share these slides with anybody who would like to have them. And for because of time, I'm going to go on to here just so that we can get through the slides and maybe we can have some more conversations that your questions initiate. So these are some easy programmatic integration. And based on the chat from earlier, it sounds like some of you are already doing this. Maybe this will provide some information or some inspiration to incorporate more kinds of intentional storytelling into your program. If anybody wants to hop on and share any other ways that they've integrated programming or storytelling or intentional storytelling into their programming, I would love to hear it.
Just because I'm so captivated by it, Aubrey, I think show and tell with a physical object is such a powerful storytelling device. So I see that in like number 5 with maybe a poster or a zine. Maybe it's a photo, but I think something more than that, like a physical artifact that people hold in their hands and tell a story about that to an audience. I just think it brings up the concrete so much more, and it reconnects folks generally to, as we start to wander in our stories, it brings us back to what we're holding in our hands. So it's simple, but I do think there's the kindergartner teachers have it right when it comes to like show and tell. So whatever that might be in people's programs, a way to integrate that I think is really powerful.
Oh, I love that idea. I want to, if anybody else wants to jump in, please, but that made me just think of something. Should have maybe put it in here, but for people who are looking for kind of other books or resources, I don't know if anyone's read Dr. Anu Tanarath's Beyond Guilt Trips, which is a phenomenal read. But she has another book called Tips. It's TIPS. And it is a book that she and her students published, I think maybe 15 or 20 years ago. She had each of them write a letter to either a thought. Oh man, it has an acronym, TIPS, but now I can't remember what it is. But they had them write a letter either to themselves, to somebody, to an object, and reflect upon how, and as a reflection exercise. I'm explaining this wrong, or I'm explaining this poorly. But the book is really inspiring as a way to think about all the different things and objects and experiences that one could tell a story about in a transformative experience like education abroad. So it might be something that you guys want to check out. It's Tips by Dr. Tanarath. Oh, that's cool, Francine. So Francine's saying, so we do write a letter to a place that witnessed some growth or transformation. That actually sounds similar to the collection of letters that I was just describing. That sounds awesome. Leanne asking students to consider aspects of nature and the stories these things, a river, mountain, rock, insect, would share in ways we can understand. Oh, that's so cool. I'm curious, like, do the students get into that? Do they like doing kind of more abstract storytelling in that way?
Yes, my experience has been they really love doing that, especially if it's like kind of in the context of a nature experience where they're being reflective and they have time in nature to kind of sit and observe and think and be. So it's been successful.
Okay, awesome. That's great. And Claire, to give students an option to submit a 3 to 5 minute video during program reflections for. Claire, can you say more about that? What kind of video? Like a personal journal video?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I have to keep my video off, but yeah, it's because the majority of them write reflections, weekly reflections during their program, but we also have given them an option to do a quick video, and it's private. So and then they're just a little bit more open and honest with their insights, and some of them I guess they just use their phone, or they actually create something on, this generation. They know all the apps. So
like just talking to screen, like just
yeah, and they upload that, or they use like some sort of program where you can also add pictures and just do a little kind of automated PowerPoint, but I don't think they use PowerPoint, but they use other kinds of things. But just to give an option, because sometimes, we also want to avoid having them use, we don't allow ChatGPT when it comes to reflections. We also give them their own kind of they can handwrite journal. They can actually submit handwritten things. We give them a journal specific for their program.
Thank you. All right, let's see. There's one more slide here. Is there? Oh yeah, this one. Okay, so this is. Go ahead, Mike.
Hand is back up. Connie, if you have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, thanks for picking it up. Aubrey, can I please pick your brain and pick everybody's brain? Particularly around students, because I just see this maybe within their context more. This whole thing of using the word narrative and as compared to story and storytelling. do you guys come across that where you actually have to separate those two things so that it's maybe understood? Because I think sometimes there is an overlay or I don't know. I'm just processing as you're talking.
What is your understanding between narrative and story?
I think for me, it's more like a deeper interpretation based on your context and your own knowledge of what the message that you're getting from a story. So it's almost like it's a turning of that story. Just like you take milk and you turn butter into it and make it a different type of product. That's how I interpret it. And sometimes it leans towards the negative.
Oh, interesting. So a narrative is a highly crafted story.
Yeah, it's because I find that the word is used so commonly. And then now you have to introduce this whole thing of storytelling, and there could be a little bit of confusion as to the narrative and then the story. You know what I mean? So I'm just trying to find a clever way around that.
I haven't encountered the overuse of the word narrative in particular. I'm not sure if anybody else can chime in about how students are leveraging that as a concept right now.
I just shared something on chat, but I do hear my students use it a lot about using the word narrative as spin, like, oh, that's an interesting narrative.
Oh, interesting.
I think the word has evolved.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
I think
And so, Kanye, you want to, so it's like such a semantic thing because a story is a narrative, and so, right? But when they have this like meta meaning into it, that has to be addressed, otherwise it's not useful.
I think narrative is more intentional. It's like you sort of have an idea of what your message is and you make the narrative fit that. Rather than just telling a story. I think there's a certain intent where you want to go with that and how you wish to be perceived with your narrative.
Interesting. So, one of the ways the first thing would be to remove themselves from the exercise. So if you want to get them thinking about storytelling or story crafting, and doing it about something else, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a person, but to let's see. It's hard because storytelling is a spin, right? It is a narrative. It is a decision about what to do. I guess maybe something that could be helpful is thinking about the intention behind the intention behind what you're going to. So like we have an exercise with all of our storytelling projects. The first thing that we do is figure out what is the purpose of the story. So the purpose of the story is who are you talking to? What is the one thing you want them to understand? And what is the one thing that you want them to do? And all of us do that for all of our stories, like immediately, kind of like on a subconscious level. But when we pull it out of ourselves and we look at it, and we're like, okay, well, who are we actually talking to? Who do we want? Who do we want to reach with this narrative or with this story? And what is the one thing that we want them to understand or what we want them to believe? And once we can kind of pull it out and look at it and discuss that as a thing, then we can figure out, okay, well, now how do we craft the story to have this kind of impact? Because as I mentioned before, like I don't operate from the place that stories are objective. There is like a documentary is a story about real life with claims to truthfulness, but truth is this sort of innocuous thing anyway. But from an ethical standpoint, going back to these questions that we mentioned earlier in terms of like who does the story center and does it avoid assumptions and savior framing and stereotypes, like I would lean when you are maybe met with some kind of obstacle or burden around this like narrative piece or using that as the catalyst to just have a conversation, to like break it open and have a conversation about it. Like, well, what do you mean by narrative? And like hear from them. What does that word mean to them? And try to figure out if it's because if it's in a negative context or if it's a more neutral thing. So I guess this is the last thing that I wanted to kind of like just point out. I know we've talked a lot about reflecting, and I'm sure that you guys are all in agreement with this idea from John Dewey that we don't learn just from experience, we learn from reflecting upon that experience. And so I think the greatest opportunity with stories in the work that we do is that every single story that could be documented or could be shared is another opportunity for intentional reflection, and that the students oftentimes just need a little container, or some boundaries or some constructs to go through that thought process. So if anybody has any other questions or wants to talk about ways that they have been implementing storytelling in their programs, that would be lovely to hear.
I work as a construction trades instructor. I'm a carpenter by trade. I teach sustainable solar, HVAC, and stuff like that. I teach OSHA safety training, and I started doing construction work within 5 years of OSHA being established as an organization. So I have a ton of stories of all the non-compliant OSHA stuff that we thought was what was expected of you earlier back in the day. So storytelling, and you know, I also work with populations who are sometimes I'm leaving to go to a returnees for an incarceration meeting after this, folks who might want to get into trades. So I find that a lot of people of the population I work with probably suffer from some sort of attention deficit disorder of some sort. And I start my classes out by saying, how many ADHD kids does it take to screw in a light bulb? Somebody says, well, many, Rick. And I say, hey, anybody want to go ride bikes? So it's like, there's a way of using storytelling, I think, that makes yourself relatable, and that can make things real, particularly when it's something that's experiential. And the closer you can get to anything that, I mean, here the best stories are where you're kind of doing a physicality with it. Where if I'm telling a story while I'm moving a scaffold about how, this guy was lifting up a 35 section of metal roof section in a team lift, and because he was a thug wannabe, his pants fell down to his ankles when he was halfway up the ladder. And now what do we do as an OSHA exercise? So there's a lot of ways you can do that, and it's like I find it fun. I think I'm in another lifetime I was probably like a Cherokee storyteller or something, because I want to get in front of a camera and just download for a while. I've been telling stories my whole life, and now I got to document some of them. I want to make sure they get a little more solid. Guess that's
Thank
about
you.
it. You're welcome.
I'm seeing some comments from Claire and Felicia. Felicia has a question. I'd love to hear more about the digital storytelling workshop that Francine offers post-experience. So Francine, if you want to talk about that. And then Claire mentioned training students in intercultural humility, discussing power, positionality, and more nuanced and deeper stories. And I just wanted to share, a few things. One, I know there's the Marshall Gans framework, right, of story of self, story of us, story of now, which is a nice, neat container. And I think there's some power to that. And I think I think narrative and story often gets interchanged. However, I do think about like, those are narrative tools that help us tell a stronger story. So I think about like the resources, the narrative resources I have. I'm not a good storyteller. I try to practice a lot. I try to study stories. So I think as students tell stories, one of the things I've learned from my research is sometimes I start out to tell a certain story and I realize looking back, wow, I told a very different story. So telling a story of failure, telling a half-finished story, right, can spark people to add what they think is happening in the story. And in doing that, in my own practice, I realized I tried to tell a story of a mistake and I ended up trying to tell a story of redemption. And so reflecting on the story that I'm telling, I think is another step potentially that can happen. And then I do think, partly to the last point as well, how I trained as I am in Western ways of knowing, Western scientific ways of knowing, I will tell a story very differently than my indigenous friends will tell a story, and how we think about story. Even folks who might embrace everything we're talking about here might see some indigenous creation stories as fictionalized, whereas my indigenous friends will be like, no, no, that is a true story. We're not making any of this up. So I think culturally, especially epistemically, how we each come to know the world definitely influences how we come to know story. And I think there's great things to mind there when it comes to cross-cultural experiences about, are we even catching it when people are trying to tell stories across cultures? Do we have the narrative tools or the cultural tools to even understand when people are telling a story in a very different way that I might tell a story?
Mike, I was just thinking, I mean, I would also love to hear from Francine too. But I think that there are some people doing some really interesting exercises in all their different programs across network, and probably people that aren't joining us here today. I wonder if in on the laundry list of things that you might want to create for the future, some kind of like some kind of white paper or some, I don't know, I'm not sure what you call it in the academic space, but like, some kind of toolkit that all programs could look at for storytelling guidelines, and then also storytelling exercises that maybe could be either sourced by a committee or by the larger membership. I think it would be like sometimes I think like everybody, like, oh, it's a great idea. Now how do I actually put it into my program? The more we have specific examples of people that are doing that, like, and how to, the more likely other people might be able to integrate it.
So a little bit about the digital storytelling. I didn't invent digital storytelling. It came out of this, as far as I know, the Story Center out of Berkeley, and has been going on for many decades now. But it's a process of helping people, not just students, tell stories that only they can tell. So they center themselves in the story. And they can be anywhere from 3 to certainly under 5 minutes long. They're very short, but they take a lot of crafting, and they combine voiceover, like a script, voiceover that the storyteller will read in first person, and sound, which could include music and sound effects, and then image, which could be still images, maybe dynamized a little bit using the Ken Burns effect in iMovie, or a little bit of video. But you can make a really powerful digital story with 3 images and a script and a little bit of sound. And this project is one of the culminating projects of a 10-week credit-bearing class that I co-teach with a colleague called What's in Your Shoebox? Unpacking Your Study Away Experience. And we bring together an intentional community of international students and students, maybe domestic or international, who have had short-term study away experiences, because we find that sometimes those communities don't come together on campus in any intentional way to share stories. And the whole 10 weeks is all about finding ways to help students reflect on and tell stories about their experiences. And they're very personal, but we also try, with help from the toolkit, the collaboratives toolkit, and other work that other colleagues are doing, try and zoom out periodically to think about, okay, this is your experience, your micro personal, but what else, where are you? Who else is there? What else is going on? How might, history, like that comment about history is alive, and, how do we carry history with us when we go to places? And enter into other people's histories. Like we try and do that zooming in and zooming out that Catherine Sorrells has spoken about so nicely in her work on intercultural. Can't remember what the name of the book is called, but intercultural communication in the context of globalization, like something like that. And for all the story, like we find that prompts are really important, and the prompts can be as simple as, like we start the course on the very first day with, what are 1 or 2 words that you would use to describe your experience? And they write them down on a note card. We give them a couple of minutes to free write about them, and they get into pairs and talk about them. And then we say, put your name on your card, and we collect them up and we move on. And then at the very end of the course, we come back and we give them their words back. So this idea of revisiting or reflecting on a story, we have them watch the Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, The Danger of a Single Story. But we first of all, we have them do their own people and place. Like, what is a single story that is told about your people or your place? What does it mask that you value, that you would like other people to know? And then we have them do the same for wherever they're studying or working, right? And then we have them compare the 2 stories, and they realize sort of how much more deeply they know their own story and their own people, and how to some degree they've overcome some stereotypes about the people and place that they're studying, but that it's really a lifelong learning process and job to really get to know a people in a place.
And Francine, you said that this is delivered over 10 weeks?
Yeah, when I took on, so I'm like a faculty liaison, so I have a half-time position in the study abroad office, and then I teach. But I came from teaching in order to sort of bring all of this stuff that's going on in the field to our faculty who take programs, still figuring out how to do that effectively. But when I negotiated the position, I said, if we're really serious about maximizing the study, maximizing study away or optimizing the study abroad continuum, the before, during, and after, as you mentioned, then we really need to be giving students time and place and, structure, intentional structure, facilitation in all of this work, reflection. We're teaching them how to reflect. And if we don't give them academic credit for this type of work, then we're not taking it seriously.
So is this a course that they're doing online in their different places, or when they get
No,
back?
this is a course. So we have 2 courses now. One is called What's in Your Shoebox? Unpacking Your Study Away Experience. It's an elective, right? We offer it once a year. And the other one is called What's in Your Toolbox? The Ethics of Travel in the Context of Globalization.
Wow.
And that, it started out as a pre-departure, but students aren't really thinking about taking it before they go. So we have short-term exchange students, international students, students who've traveled away, students who are preparing to travel away. Again, it's an elective. It only reaches, but deeply, 50 students a year. But what we're learning from the classes is that we can take little pieces of these things. You talked about the easy integration of these things. Like you can take the 1 or 2 words, you can take the evocative object, you can take, the danger of a single story, and you can do it in 2 hours with a dinner. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Francine. That was lovely. That sounds like a really amazing work that the university is willing to prioritize. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Well, I think if that is all the questions for now, I think that is all my presentation. I don't know if Mike, if you have anything else to say. If anybody wants to reach me, my information is on the screen. I am always available to brainstorm problem solving around storytelling and to share about ways that we have developed exercises or frameworks or conversations to address the problems that we have found or created in the programming that we run. So I hope that this is just the beginning of a relationship, because that's really what it's all about.